Hello, my name is Gab Davis, and welcome to our next Path to a Perfect 10, our journey towards deploying Domino Notes Same Time Traveler version 10. For those of you that don't know me, I'm an admin. I work with a lot of collaboration technologies, and I like to work with difficult things that need to talk to each other. So, our session today, we're going to skip past the Are We Ready? We've done a lot of Are We Ready? We've done a lot of how to upgrade. What I want to talk about today is how to build a test environment. So today is the 10th of October and it's version 10 day. Domino 10, Notes 10 shipped today along with Traveler 10. It's available for download all around the world. So if you've already downloaded it and you're about to go ahead and do that, then go ahead, do that, grab the files, download them, then stop. It's time to decide how you're going to test, unless you already did all of that. Some of my previous sessions have talked about how to prepare for the testing. So our first question is, what do we want from our testing? What we want is what I'm calling good testing. We want to test the servers and the clients so we can learn how to configure things and what we want to deploy. We want to test to confirm a feature does what we think it does. Until we work with it, we don't know what it does. We want to test against real data, but we don't want to test in production or on any production servers. We want to test so we can come up with a plan to deploy into production. We want to make sure all the new products work with all our existing applications, internal services, external services, anything that touches Domino. We want an environment there really in the longer term that we can then carry on testing updates against. So how do we do this good testing? Let's talk about what we want to test. So on the right hand side here, I have my domain called prod for production and my organization, which is O equals Goliath. And in my domain, I've got a mail and app server called Mail1 Goliath and another mail and app server, which is clustered with it called Mail2 Goliath. And then separate from that, I have a traveler server still within the same domain, but not clustered. So if this is our production environment, what would I want to test? Well, I want to test my existing server configuration on the new server version, so I know if there's anything I need to change. I'm going to want to test cluster behavior and some new cluster features. Apps functionality, apps performance, maybe upgrading to the latest ODS, which now has the 256 gig file limit and will also give me access to a lot of database properties that I don't have in 901. Testing new template designs, such as the new, I'll put Mail 9. I don't mean Mail 9, I mean Mail 10. Enabling new features, Traveler, any extension manner add-ins or libraries, and if you're thinking of moving to a new operating system, you're going to want to test that. There's a lot more you can test, but you decide your priorities and your scope. My previous session to this, called Dependencies and Priorities, was designed to help you decide what you want to test. So if we're testing a cluster, we want to test a cluster if we already have a cluster in production. So we want to work with real data. Take database copies of data onto your lab servers. It may seem easier to take replicas, but you don't want to risk any bleed from lab to production or the other way around. You don't want a chance of anything replicating back by accident. You can absolutely secure the servers so they can't access each other. But if you use the same ID to access both servers, then your ID has the ability to bridge that gap, even by accident. Working with actual data is important because it's going to allow you to evaluate work effort involved and plan. So you don't have to reproduce all the data, but you want to have some milestone points, large databases, heavily used databases, databases with agents in them. In our lab cluster, we can then test new features like enhanced streaming cluster replication, cluster symmetry, and auto database repair. A lot of these TCO features, which are driving some of our reasons for upgrading, if we're an admin like me, we're going to want to test that separately in the lab. We build our lab in an entirely new domain and we don't have any connection from production to the new domain. It would be nice if our lab was on an isolated network, so there's absolutely no way for the two environments to see each other. But if you can't do that, you need to be just careful not to tell the servers about each other at any point. So here's my lab. So I have my production, which we already looked at. On the left-hand side, I've got my lab. So it's a domain called lab, but it's still got the organization, oh, it calls Goliath. So my two lab servers are lab1 Goliath and lab2 Goliath. Why have I done it like that? We're going to talk about that in a second. So when we want to install our lab server, the setup screen is first going to ask, is this the first server in our organization? Now, in this example, our organization Goliath already has 3 servers in it. So technically, it's not the first server in our organization. However, what that setup program is actually asking is, do I need to create a new domain? And the answer here is yes, we want our lab domain to be created empty with these new lab servers in them. However, if we choose this is the first server, the setup will then expect to create the certifier ID and the server ID and the admin ID, and we don't want it to do that. We certainly don't want it to create a new certifier ID. We want it to use the Goliath certifier ID we're already using in production. So we're going to check the box on setup that says I already have a certifier ID, and we're going to point it to the location of the Goliath certifier. The setup will now create a new server as lab1 Goliath, but in a brand new domain called lab. So that domain, you'll have a names.nsf, which just has that one server in it and is totally unaware of the production domain with the other servers in it. So why do we do that? It may seem easier and more secure to create our lab with a different organization and a different domain, and it's definitely more secure. However, we want to get the best test we can here. If we use the same organizational certifier, then the IDs that signed agents, for instance, can be allowed to work. If we use a new organizational certifier, none of the signatures anywhere are going to work until you re-sign them. And if we have to re-sign them, we're changing and touching a lot of things. And are we truly testing what's going to happen in production? There are arguments to be made, I think, for both, but in this model, we're not building a lab domain for a security reason, we're building it for a testing reason. So we want to test prior to deploying into production. I personally find it best to duplicate the production environment as closely as possible. So how many servers do I need in my lab environment? The good news here is you're testing functionality and you're testing with a subset of data and users. We can and should double up on server roles to minimize the number of lab servers we have. So in my lab, I have 2 servers that are clustered and both configured for mail with clustered mail databases. However, on one server, I'm also testing apps and Traveler, and on the other server, I'm testing HTTP. I don't need my servers to be identical in configuration or functionality for my testing. Also, if you don't have a cluster, you don't need to test a cluster. So you could do this with one server. So a few more tips. This is how I do it, but I don't know your environment and the specifics of your lab, and that's really down to what you need to test and what your priorities are. Your lab environment can be as little as a single server if you don't have clusters, but try and test all the important things to your business. Again, check out my previous session on priorities and dependencies. Domino's great in partitioning, but using partitioning for your lab servers is not a good test unless you use partitioning in production. Take the opportunity, if you can, to test on the operating system you'll be running on. It's the things we don't test that catch us out. Don't assume that when you move to this new operating system, there won't be any side effects. Don't cut corners by letting the 2 domains, lab and production, talk to each other. Nothing good can come of that. It might seem like, well, I can easily replicate between the two. I highly recommend you don't do that. Another idea is to secure the lab environment. You could use the server access list to explicitly deny access to the production servers. So then you know the production servers can't accidentally talk to the lab servers, and you could do vice versa. You could deny the lab servers access to the production servers. to be on the safe side. I find if I manage it properly and I've isolated my lab, I don't need to go that far. The servers won't go looking for each other unless you tell them they're there. So the only way you're going to hit a problem is if you're using the same ID in production and a lab and you yourself accidentally do something. So that's our setting up a lab. Where are we? Well, hopefully you've now got the software downloaded and you're raring to go. You can quickly build your lab, start testing. It's never too early to start testing and planning. Even if you're planning to deploy in Q1 or Q2, starting to test, starting to plan your upgrade. And with the lab in place, you can start showing Domino 10, Notes 10 first internally so your users can get excited about new features that are coming and you can better prepare their expectations. So that's it for creating our lab. Next up, we're going to talk about Domino version 10 admin and TCO. And in this session, I'm actually going to be able to show you stuff. So that's going to be great. Speak to you next time.